One missile, one memory, and a warning the world was not ready to receive. At 4:05 in the morning, local time, something crossed the Iraqi desert at hypersonic velocity and found a coordinate it had visited before. Al Asad Air Base, 200 kilometers west of Baghdad, buried in the Anbar province flatlands, absorbed the impact of a precision ballistic strike. Within minutes, secondary explosions began. Within an hour, the casualty count was climbing past numbers that no press secretary would be able to manage with careful language. 31 American service members dead on a base that the world had already watched absorb an Iranian attack once before and exhaled with relief when everyone walked away. That exhale was the miscalculation. And tonight, Iran corrected it. Before you assume this is a repeat of 2020, before you reach for the mental file you already built around that event and slot this into it, understand something. Iran is counting on you to do exactly that. The entire strategic logic of this strike is built around the assumption that the world will recognize the address, remember the outcome last time, and draw false comfort from the comparison. That comfort is the weapon. That familiarity is the trap. Al Asad is not a symbolic target. It is not chosen for its history or its name recognition. It is chosen because of what it represents in the operational architecture of American military presence in Iraq, which is something far more fragile and far more consequential than most people understand. The base houses drone operations, intelligence fusion cells, and the logistical spine that connects American forward positions across western Iraq to the broader Central Command network. When you take Al Asad, you do not just take a patch of desert. You sever a thread that runs through the entire regional nervous system. And you do it in a location where the political ground beneath American boots has been shifting for years. Here's what Iran understood that the world forgot. In 2020, when Iranian ballistic missiles struck this same base in retaliation for the killing of Qasem Soleimani, the attack was calibrated with extraordinary precision. Not precision of targeting, though that was present, but precision of outcome. Iranian commanders knew in advance through back-channel communications that have since been partially confirmed by investigative reporting approximately how much warning American forces would receive. The strike was designed to send a message while keeping the death toll at zero. It was a demonstration of capability wrapped inside a gesture of restraint, and the world received it as proof that both sides understood the rules. What Iran demonstrated tonight is that the rules were always provisional. The restraint was never a principle. It was a choice, and choices can be revised. 31 dead changes the entire topology of the crisis, not because the number is large by historical standards of military conflict, but because of where it lands inside the American political system. 3 deaths, the toll from the Jordan strike in January 2024, can be absorbed. They produce grief, they produce statements, they produce a carefully bounded retaliatory strike that both sides can live with. 31 deaths cannot be absorbed. They produce congressional hearings. They produce primetime coverage that runs for weeks. They produce demands from legislators who have spent years avoiding a formal war authorization vote to suddenly take a position publicly on camera with constituents watching. Iran did not spend the last 14 months studying American air defense upgrades at Al Asad. Iran spent 14 months studying the congressional record, approval ratings, the schedule of the American electoral cycle, and the precise casualty threshold above which the domestic political cost of restraint exceeds the domestic political cost of escalation. They found that number. Tonight they used it. This is the dimension of modern conflict that conventional military analysis consistently underweights. The battlefield is not only the desert, the battlefield includes the Senate floor, the cable news cycle, the social media platforms where images from the strike will be shared before the Pentagon has completed its initial damage assessment. Iran does not need to win a conventional military exchange with the United States. Iran needs to make the cost of American presence in the region exceed the political will to sustain it. Every casualty figure is a vote count. Every flag-draped coffin is a pressure calculation. But the strike on Al Asad is not operating in isolation. It is the visible surface of a coordinated pressure architecture that has been assembling itself across multiple domains for months. In the weeks leading up to tonight, shipping through the northern Persian Gulf has been subject to escalating Iranian harassment, inspections of vessels under disputed pretexts, and at least 3 incidents of GPS jamming that forced commercial tankers to navigate blind through some of the most congested maritime corridors on Earth. The incidents were reported in industry publications. They did not make the front pages. They were not supposed to. Simultaneously, Iranian-aligned networks across Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon have been in a period of what analysts carefully describe as elevated operational tempo. Weapons caches repositioned, command structures reorganized, communications protocols changed in ways that suggest preparation for a shift in operational phase rather than routine maintenance. All of this was visible in the intelligence picture. All of it was assessed, weighted, and monitored. And somewhere in that monitoring, the signal was read as preparation rather than execution. That distinction between a threat preparing and a threat moving is the gap through which 31 people fell tonight. The Iraqi government now occupies a position of almost impossible political geometry. Baghdad has spent years attempting to balance formal alliance with the United States against the practical reality that Iranian-aligned Shia militia networks are woven into the fabric of Iraqi security forces, politics, and economics. Every Iraqi prime minister for the past decade has tried to make that balance work. Tonight, the balance broke. Because when an Iranian ballistic missile kills 31 Americans on Iraqi soil, Washington will not wait for Baghdad to conduct an investigation. Washington will act. And when Washington acts inside Iraqi territory without Iraqi government authorization, the legal and political basis for continued American presence in Iraq does not weaken. It collapses. That collapse is not a side effect. That collapse is a strategic objective. Iran has understood for years that the most durable way to remove American military infrastructure from Iraq is not to destroy it, but to make it politically untenable for Iraqi leaders to host it. A crisis that forces Baghdad to choose publicly between Washington and Tehran in the aftermath of mass American casualties on Iraqi soil is a crisis that produces exactly that choice, and Iran has studied Iraqi domestic politics long enough to know which way that choice is likely to fall. The implications extend far beyond Iraq's borders. Every government in the region that hosts American military personnel is tonight running a version of the same calculation that Baghdad is running. The question is not whether they support the United States in principle. The question is whether the cost of that support, measured in domestic political stability, in economic exposure to Iranian pressure, and in the physical security of American installations on their territory, remains a price they can continue to pay. Jordan, Kuwait, Qatar, the UAE, each of these relationships is tonight under a pressure it has not experienced before. Not because of a change in American policy, but because of a change in demonstrated Iranian willingness to escalate. In Moscow, the assessment is clinical and immediate. Russian military analysts have maintained detailed models of American deterrence thresholds for decades. The 2020 Al Asad strike was entered into those models as a data point suggesting that Iran could strike American forces directly, and the response would remain limited and reversible. Tonight adds a new data point. If the American response to 31 dead service members is calibrated, proportional, and designed to avoid broader escalation, the Russian models will record a specific conclusion. The cost of directly killing American military personnel is not infinite. It is a number, and once a number exists, it can be approached. Beijing's calculation runs on a different timeline. China has watched the trajectory of American military attention for years with one primary concern. As long as Washington remains anchored to the Middle East by active crises, the bandwidth available for sustained focus on the Indo-Pacific remains constrained. A Middle East in full crisis mode, consuming American political capital, military assets, and public attention, is not a problem for Beijing. It is an environment. Chinese strategic planners do not need to manufacture opportunity in the Taiwan Strait. They need American planners to be exhausted, divided, and facing domestic pressure to disengage. Tonight accelerates all three conditions simultaneously. The economic reverberation does not wait for diplomatic meetings to conclude. Within the first 6 hours of the strike, Brent crude moves sharply upward. Lloyd's of London revises war risk ratings for the northern Persian Gulf. Shipping companies with vessels in transit begin rerouting calculations. The Suez Canal Authority starts receiving inquiries about transit capacity because vessels avoiding the Gulf will redirect through the Mediterranean, increasing congestion and delay across a routing system that was not designed to absorb sudden demand spikes of this magnitude. South Korea and Japan, both deeply dependent on Gulf oil imports, begin reviewing emergency petroleum reserve protocols by morning. And in Tehran, something counterintuitive occurs. The political leadership does not panic. It does not convene in crisis. It waits. Because the Iranian strategy, at this moment, is not about what Iran does next. It is about forcing the United States to reveal, under maximum pressure and minimum preparation time, exactly where its real red lines fall and how much it is actually willing to pay to defend them. Every American statement made in the next 72 hours, every retaliatory action taken or not taken, every alliance commitment honored or softened, is data. Iran is not fighting a battle tonight. Iran is conducting a diagnostic. Behind every strategic variable in this crisis, there are people who have no voice in any of the calculations. Al Asad Air Base at 4:05 in the morning is not a military abstraction. It is a place where a 26-year-old signal specialist from Tennessee is running a communications watch, where a 42-year-old master sergeant from New Mexico finished a 12-hour shift 40 minutes before the strike and had just closed his eyes, where someone was composing a message home, choosing which words to use, trying to describe the desert at night in a way that the person reading it could almost feel. A ballistic missile does not read personnel rosters. It does not distinguish between the architects of the policy that place those people in that location and the people themselves. It only finds the coordinate. The names will come later. They will be read into the congressional record. They will be spoken at grave sites by families who cannot be comforted by deterrence theory or geopolitical analysis. They will be carried by people for the rest of their lives. Deterrence is not a mechanism, it is a belief sustained across decades by the consistency of its enforcement that certain actions carry certain consequences reliably enough that rational actors choose not to test them. In 2020, Iran tested that belief carefully at low cost and found it resilient. Tonight, Iran tested it again at far higher cost, using the memory of the first test as cover for the second. The question the world is now waiting to answer is whether the belief holds under this weight. Not because the answer determines what happens in Iraq, but because the answer determines what every adversarial actor in every other theater now believes is possible. History does not announce the moments when the rules change, it simply changes them and leaves everyone else to figure out what the new rules are. That work begins now.